Hi, this is the beginning of the last part 4 of our conference on anti-Semitism, defining anti-Semitism and why it matters. I wanted to thank everybody for their perseverance so far. And the delight at the end is Achron Chaviv, last and most cherished. I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker, Bret Stephens. He's an op-ed columnist for the New York Times and editor-in-chief of Sapir, a new quarterly that's dedicated to exploring issues of Jewish concern. He's previously worked as foreign affairs columnist for the Wall Street Journal and as editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Among his many prizes and distinctions are the 2013 Pulitzer Prize for Distinguished Commentary, the 2019 Ellis Island Medal of Honor, and 3 honorary doctorates. He was raised in Mexico City and educated at the University of Chicago and the London School of Economics, and lives with his family near New York City. I'm told that we may have a few minutes for question and answer at the end. Please use the bottom middle of your screen, the question and answer tab to set forth your questions, and I'll put them to him. With that, it's up to you, Bret.
Stephen, thank you for hosting me and for arranging this, I think, extraordinarily important investigation into anti-Semitism. There's an old joke. It takes place in the central train station of Vienna. And a man is walking up, accosting people in the train station. And with one person after another, he says, "Excuse me, but are you an anti-Semite?" And of course, one person after another responds by saying, "How dare you? How could you call me that? How can you even think that? What sort of question is that?" Finally, after a few minutes, one fellow says, "Well, come to think about it, I am an anti-Semite. I really hate Jews." And the man says, "Oh, at last, an honest fellow. Do you mind keeping an eye on my luggage while I run to the men's room?" So it's hard to tell a joke over Zoom, but it's a useful joke in the sense that it, I think, gives us an entry point into the difficulty of understanding anti-Semitism, not least because quite often anti-Semites refuse to tell us what it is that they in fact believe, often absolutely and adamantly deny being anti-Semites. And yet we know that there is probably a great deal more anti-Semitism out in the world, and a growing amount of anti-Semitism than what many people will admit to. So what is anti-Semitism, and why, I should add, have so many of the regular definitions of it and the popular understandings of it been so wide of the mark? So first question, is anti-Semitism racism? Well, anti-Semitism can be racism, a form of racism, but it is not always racism. Is anti-Semitism a religious prejudice? Yes, anti-Semitism can be a religious prejudice, but one can feel anti-Semitically inclined for non-religious reasons against non-religious Jews. Is anti-Semitism a form of xenophobia? Again, it can often be a form of xenophobia, but not necessarily in all cases. Is anti-Semitism opposition to Semitism? Well, I have news for you. There really is no such thing as Semitism, and the closest one could describe, the closest or most accurately one could describe Semitism has to do with a family of languages, not a race, an ethnicity, or people from a particular geographical area. So that makes it that much more difficult to think about anti-Semitism, because it's opposition to something that is mostly incomprehensible and probably doesn't exist. So what was the original idea behind anti-Semitism? For that, you have to actually turn to the coinage of that term, which begins in the 1870s with a political agitator and pamphleteer by the name of Wilhelm Marr, who in 1879 started what he called the League of Anti-Semites. Focus for a moment on the word league, because league is also, or can also be, another term for a political party. So that gets at something that's actually quite important about the nature of anti-Semitism, which is that it isn't just a particular kind of prejudice, although of course it is a prejudice, but not just a particular kind of prejudice. It's a prejudice married to a political agenda. And it's not just prejudice married to a political agenda. It's prejudice that is married to a political agenda based on a conspiracy theory. What is the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory? Well, it is a certain view about, or a certain idea about Jewish power. You should put power in inverted commas in quotation marks, because it's a view about Jewish power, whether Jews have power or not. What are some of the core anti-Semitic beliefs over time? One is that the Jews had the power to kill Christ, to kill God. That was an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that lasted over or almost 2,000 years. Deicide requires vast power, and that was a conspiracy theory. That was one of the conspiracy theories. Another one, that Jews had the power to control global finances, global industries, global media. That's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that is with us right here up until the present. Third anti-Semitic conspiracy theory is that Jews had the power to manipulate the great powers, that is to say, Great Britain or Germany or France, or more recently, the United States. What was one of the signal anti-Semitic theories in the past 30 years? That somehow either the first Gulf War back in 1991, or then the invasion of Iraq in 2003, or other major foreign policy decisions by the United States were somehow instigated at the behest of powerful and somewhat secretive Jews for the benefit of the Jewish state of Israel. That is a classic anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And not least the idea that Jews have, in fact, the power to destroy the whole world. After 9/11, which was an attack perpetrated by an Islamist fanatic, Osama bin Laden, and his minions, in the name of creating an Islamist caliphate, one of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that took root was the idea that really the cause of that attack hadn't been American troops in Saudi Arabia or opposition to US policy. It had, in fact, been opposition to the state of Israel, which is not, as it happens, what Osama bin Laden believed or talked about. So that's another recent anti-Semitic conspiracy theory based on an idea of Jewish power. Now, it's not just about the concept or the idea of Jewish power, it's also about the means through which Jewish power is used. There is an idea that Jewish power is largely secret. That is to say, Jews pull the strings, but they are behind the scenes. It is the idea that Jews are imposters, that they are not who they say they are. And it is the idea that Jews are swindlers. So with all of that as a predicates, let me offer what I think is a succinct definition of anti-Semitism. And it's as follows. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory based on the belief that Jews are uniquely prone to use deceitful means in order to achieve immoral ends, and must therefore be opposed by political and, if necessary, by violent means. That, I think, achieves a definition of anti-Semitism that is accurate and comprehensive. Now, one question that frequently comes up is, how does this relate to a much broader and current phenomenon, the phenomenon of anti-Zionism? You will often hear people who describe themselves as anti-Zionists as nonetheless having and wanting nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Although most of us suspect, and have, I think, good reason to suspect, that there is significant overlap between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. What is that overlap? How are the two consonant? And in fact, in my view, ultimately, largely, although not entirely, identical. Well, what is, again, let's go back to the idea of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, as someone like Wilhelm Marr conceived it in the late 19th century, was an idea that Jews were imposters and swindlers. Imposters how? Well, they were imposters in the sense that although Jews in Germany might represent themselves as Germans who happened to practice the Jewish faith, in fact, they weren't German at all. They were Semites. That is the importance of the term Semite, that they did not come from Europe, that they did not come from the European race, as Wilhelm Marr saw it, but that they came from the Middle East. So they were imposters posing as Germans, or as the case may be, as French or as English or as Austrian, and so on, but they were from some other place. They were imposters. And what were these imposters doing, according to the original anti-Semites? They were swindlers. What were they trying to swindle Europeans out of? They were trying to swindle them out of their industry and their agriculture and their wealth and their patrimony. That was the original anti-Semitic allegation about the Jews. How is that like anti-Zionism? Well, what does the anti-Zionist say? Well, he says that the Israelis, that is to say Jewish Israelis, are imposters in the sense that they claim to have a native connection to the land of Israel, but are, in the anti-Zionist view, not at all from the land of Israel. They're colonizers, they're settlers, they're people who came from Europe and other places. And the anti-Zionist goes on to say they're also swindlers. What are they swindling? They're swindling the Palestinian people out of their patrimony, out of their land, out of their state, out of their inheritance. That is the anti-Zionist allegation. Notice the consonance between the anti-Semitic worldview of the Jew as the swindler and the imposter, the swindler from not Europe, and then the anti-Zionist view of the Jew as the imposter and the swindler, this time the swindler from Europe. Otherwise, they're identical. And here I just want to stress briefly, and I assume people understand this, when I talk about anti-Zionism, I'm not simply talking about opposition to one Israeli policy or another, whether it's settlements or military policy in Gaza or some other aspect of Israeli policy. All of that is legitimate criticism of Israel, just as one can legitimately criticize the American government, French government, and so on. I'm talking about opposition to the concept of a Jewish state in and of itself, opposition to the idea that there is any right of a Jewish state to exist, or to at least exist in its current place and its current form. I want to make just a few additional points, because anti-Semitism happens to be a belief, much like a virus, that tends to thrive in certain intellectual environments. That is to say, there are, again, I think the virus analogy is a good one. There are certain hosts, certain circumstances in which anti-Semitism is going to flourish, and others where it's going to essentially be killed off and reduced. And here in the United States, one of my great fears is that a set of beliefs is taking hold in which anti-Semitism has unique opportunities to flourish. Let me offer you 4 of these ideas in particular. One aspect is this. In the last few years, the idea of the United States being, as this old saying goes, a salad bowl of different ethnicities, each of which had had their own experience of prejudice, discrimination, and struggle, has changed, has been transformed. Today, when we think about the difference between the minorities and majorities, it's become very dual. It is white people or people of color. That is the new division. And because the vast majority of American Jews are Ashkenazi, they are presumed to be white. Now, in fact, in the Jewish tradition, the idea of white, black, these racial categorizations don't really exist for us. And as a Jew, I think it's something that we ought to reject. Race is fundamentally a social construct. But in America today, Jews are overwhelmingly seen as white, and white is associated with white supremacy. And so this has become a problematic aspect of American Jewish identity, that our particularism as a people is being stripped for us, and we are being shunted into a racial classification that within living memory was in fact used in an attempt to utterly destroy the Jewish people. The second aspect that concerns me is the transformation of success into what is often called privilege. For a lot of American Jews, the story of our time in the United States is a story of struggling and succeeding against the odds. And American Jews feel not only that their success has been earned, either by them directly or at least maybe by a parent or a grandparent, but more than that, that success in the United States is widely admired because it's seen as deserved. But another transformation in American cultural life in the last few years is that the concept of success has been turned into a concept of privilege, and privilege is suspect, and privilege is often seen not only as unearned, but often deserving of being taken away. Historically, this has been a bad position for the Jewish people, whether it was the success that Jews achieved in Germany in the 1920s, only to be stripped of it violently in the 1930s, or in France in the 1880s before the Dreyfus affair in one country after another. But the transformation of the concept of success into a concept of privilege is one of those larger intellectual constructs that is conducive to anti-Semitism. The third idea is that intellectual heterodoxy, which has been part of the Jewish tradition, argument for the sake of heaven, as they say, intellectual heterodoxy, activism, skepticism, irreverence, questioning, these sorts of habits of mind are being increasingly treated in many circles as a form of heresy. And as the avenues for questioning, for intellectual challenge become narrower in the United States, I think, again, it becomes profoundly problematic for the position of American Jews. And finally, the final point is that we now live in a society in which conspiracy theories, whether of the left or of the right, are becoming more and more mainstream. Whether the conspiracy theory has to do with 9/11 trutherism or birtherism, or the conspiracy theory, the lie about the 2020 election, the conspiracy mindset is taking hold in the United States as it hasn't in generations. If people will believe anything about anything, eventually they may believe the worst about Jews. So that is something that ought to concern us all. Anti-Semitism, I'm sorry to say, isn't going away. It is a prejudice that is more than 2,000 years old. It is getting worse. And the best way to deal with anti-Semitism, as it is with any disease, is to rapidly identify its causes, understand its symptoms, describe its nature, look for the vectors of the disease, and then find ways to combat it. We've had a recent experience of this in dealing with COVID-19 and anti-Semitism can be thought of as a pandemic of the mind. I hope we have the resources morally and intellectually to stop it. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop and maybe take a few of the questions.
Thank you very much. One question was asked was based on the definition you offered. And the questioner wanted to know whether you thought that your definition was different from the IRA definition. And if so, in what ways?
Well, the IRA definition is a certain belief about Jews, right? It is, to me, a vague and unhelpful definition because it specifies neither the cause of the prejudice, nor does it particularly specify the victim of the prejudice. It is important to understand that anti-Semitism isn't simply a bigotry. It is a bigotry married to a political agenda, which is based on a conspiracy theory that originates in a notion of Jewish power. That is fundamentally different from what IRA proposes, which strikes me as much too vague in order to really deal with what we're looking at.
What do you think about the other two leading alternatives to IRA, which was the Jerusalem Declaration or the Nexus Statement? The Jerusalem Declaration that was signed on to about 300 academics and others. You have any comments about that? Any thoughts about it?
No, not really, because I don't have the declaration in front of me, so I'd have to look at it. But again, the purpose of this talk was to offer you the Stevens definition, and then leave it to legal minds and scholarly minds to debate it.
Any idea? And you said obviously there's no silver bullet as to what we can do, but is any suggestions as to what the lay people, people who aren't writing in major newspapers or publications, what people can do to try to help combat anti-Semitism?
Steve?
I'm sorry, I don't hear. Yeah, what happened? I hear you. Oh, there you go. Oh, you didn't hear me.
Yeah, the lay people.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Just people who aren't academics or aren't public politicians. The majority of people, if they wanted to do something, what could they do? What should they do? Should they do something vis-a-vis non-Jews? Should they, petition for something in particular? In other words, many people who sort of expressed the concern to me that they feel like they realize there's a problem and they want to help and it's desperate to help, but they don't know what to do.
Right. And I would say to them that it begins by understanding what the nature of this disease is. I wish I could offer the elevator 20-second pitch, and maybe that is, if you have an idea of Jewish people that is prejudicial or based on a concept of Jewish power that is somehow secretive, you may be susceptible to anti-Semitic ideas. One other aspect of this is that there are people who are anti-Semites, and there are people who succumb to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories without quite knowing it. And the example I would offer you, Steve, is this. In the run-up to the Iraq War, which probably most people on this call remember, you might remember that it was often said that the authors of the war were Paul Wolfowitz and Doug Fife and Richard Pearl and Elliot Abrams. Now, what is it that those four guys have in common? If your answer is, well, they're all Jews, that's one thing they have in common. The other thing they have in common is they were all second, third, or fourth tier officials in the Bush administration. People who made the decision to go to war in Iraq had names like George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld and Condoleezza Rice, and to a certain extent, Colin Powell. And all of those people were Christians. So an idea takes hold that the war was actually instigated by four low-level Jews. Many people who believe that believe it without consciously realizing that they are succumbing to an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Now, if I tell someone this, they might say, oh, I never thought of it that way. In that case, great, you've done your job. If their answer is, well, actually, those guys were secretly pulling the strings, then you're dealing with an anti-Semite.
One last question. Someone asks, he has an observation that his opinion is that leading American newspapers such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post are anti-Israel. I don't think that about Wall Street Journal myself, but the other two, I'm not sure. And pro-BDS in their reporting rather than objective in their reporting about Israel. What has been your experience in this regard?
My experience is that both at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, where I've served for a long time, I have made my views clear in a forthright way. I've been allowed to, I have never been interfered with, and I have spoken up, including when I saw what I thought was unwitting anti-Semitism in the New York Times itself, and all that is on the record. And I think it's a credit to the newspaper that when they published a cartoon that, to my eyes, had clearly anti-Semitic overtones, that not only did they retract it, apologize for it, but they let me write a withering column about it, which is not common in most newspapers. And I think that's a great credit to the paper. We can always quarrel with reporting. I certainly do. But the New York Times is the most important newspaper in the world, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, Ali. And with that, I just want to conclude on behalf of the DePaul College of Law Center for Jewish Law and Judaic Studies. We'll thank everybody who participated. Everyone did a wonderful job. And we, as I said before at the outset, our center, while we're hosted by DePaul, and DePaul provides us with some background resources, it provides us with no funding. Our funding depends on you, your institutions, your organizations. In the materials we sent you, there are links that you can contribute, make charitable contributions to the center or to our scholarship fund, and we hope you do it. We will be making a tape of this available, and if you did experience any technological difficulties, I apologize for that. We hope to see you at our programs again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.